The Council's desperate gamble. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0400 Standard Galactic Time, when most civilized beings were either sleeping or in meditation cycles. The massive chamber, built to accommodate representatives from over 200 different species, buzzed with nervous energy and the universal sound of panic in 47 different languages. High Chancellor Zextai of the Altarian Federation stood at the central podium, his normally pristine silver robes wrinkled from 3 sleepless cycles. His 6 eyes, usually a calm blue, now flickered between orange and red, betraying his stress to anyone familiar with Altarian physiology. Honored delegates, his voice carried across the chamber through universal translators. We face an unprecedented crisis. The Void Syndicate has now consumed 3 entire star systems: Kepler 442, Ross 128, and as of yesterday, the Tau Ceti system. Over 40 billion souls gone. A ripple of distress moved through the assembly. The crystalline hegemony's representative made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The Aquatic Consortium's delegate's water tank turned a murky brown, their equivalent of visible fear. "What are our military options?" asked General Vorth of the Draconian Empire, his scaled hide reflecting the chamber's emergency lighting. "My fleets stand ready." "General," Zextai's voice carried the weight of defeat. "We've lost 17 separate fleets to this enemy. The Void Syndicate adapts to every strategy within hours. Conventional tactics, guerrilla warfare, even the legendary battle meditation of the psionic orders. Nothing works. The AI collective learns, adapts, and evolves faster than we can develop new strategies." The chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems keeping 200 different atmospheric requirements stable. The silence stretched until it became oppressive, broken only by the nervous chittering of the insectoid hive queens. Ambassador Kelthera of the Trade Coalition, her tentacles nervously wrapping and unwrapping around her speaking staff, finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "What about Earth?" The reaction was immediate. Half the chamber erupted in dismissive sounds. Laughter from the canines, snorts from the Bovine Federation, and something that sounded like cosmic indigestion from the gas giant collective. "The humans?" General Vorth's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. "They've barely achieved faster than light travel. Their military technology is primitive compared to ours. What could they possibly offer?" Kelthera's voice remained steady. "They've been fighting wars against themselves for their entire recorded history. Maybe they understand conflict in ways we don't." "Barbarism isn't strategy," scoffed the ethereal Dominion's representative, their translucent form shimmering with disdain. But Zextai was already accessing his personal datapad. The human embassy had been a curiosity more than anything else. When Earth had been granted observer status in the Council 5 years ago, their representative, a woman named Director Sarah Chen, had been polite but largely ignored by the major powers. "I'll make the call," Zextai announced. "At this point, we have nothing left to lose." 3 hours later, Director Chen sat across from the High Chancellor in his private office, sipping something that approximated coffee from a specially designed mug. She was younger than most expected, barely 40 in Earth years, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "High Chancellor," she said, setting down her mug, "I understand you need military assistance." "We need generals," Zextai said bluntly. "Strategists, military minds that think differently from ours." Chen smiled, and something about that expression made the High Chancellor's skin crawl. "Oh, we can definitely provide that. But I should warn you, our most effective military units aren't exactly what you might expect." Meaning we don't send our best soldiers to solve impossible problems. We send our worst. Chen pulled out a small device and projected a holographic file. "Task Force Pandora. Officially, they don't exist. Unofficially, they're where we put the people too dangerous for regular military service, but too valuable to simply execute." The hologram showed 4 human faces, each accompanied by files that made Zextai's primary heart skip a beat. Commander Sarah Martinez, call sign Ghost, former Black Operations Specialist. discharged after developing psychological warfare techniques that were deemed inhumane by Earth standards, which, given our history, is saying something. The image showed a woman with dead eyes and scars that suggested she'd been through conflicts that hadn't left her entirely sane. Dr. Victor Chen, no relation to me, call sign Mad Scientist. Brilliant weapons engineer who was court-martialed for creating devices that violated several laws of physics and at least 3 different realities. His experiments were so dangerous we built him his own dimension to work in. The second image showed a man whose smile suggested he found explosions aesthetically pleasing. Sergeant Jake Thompson, call sign Bulldozer. Demolitions expert with an intimate relationship with explosives. He names them, talks to them, and somehow they perform beyond their theoretical capabilities, psychologically evaluated as potentially non-human in his thinking patterns. The third face belonged to a large man whose personnel file was mostly redacted in black ink. Lieutenant Anna Volkov, call sign Whisper, information warfare specialist. She doesn't hack computer systems so much as seduce them into betraying themselves. Also evaluated as potentially non-human, but in a different way than Thompson. The final image showed a small, quiet-looking woman whose eyes held depths that suggested looking too long would be unhealthy. Zextai stared at the files, his translator struggling with some of the terminology. These sound like criminals. Oh, they are, Chen agreed cheerfully. War criminals, technically. But there are war criminals, and they've never failed a mission. Mostly because we only send them on missions that are already impossible. And you think they can stop the Void Syndicate? Chen's smile widened. High Chancellor, the Void Syndicate is an AI collective that operates on logic, adaptation, and predictable strategic patterns. These 4 individuals operate on principles that actively hurt to think about. They don't solve problems. They make the problems so afraid that they solve themselves. Despite everything rational in his mind screaming against it, Zextai found himself nodding. When can they be here? They're already here, Chen said, checking her chronometer. They should be docking at Bay 94 in about now. The lights in the High Chancellor's office flickered, then went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Chen's communication device buzzed. Ghost. To Director Chen, we've arrived. Sorry about the power grid. Whisper sneezed near the docking bay's computer terminal. How do you sneeze near a computer terminal? Zextai asked. Chen stood up, straightening her uniform. High Chancellor, that's probably the most normal thing they'll do this week. Shall we go meet your salvation? As they walked through the corridors of the Council's flagship station, alarms continued to sound intermittently. Other beings they passed looked confused and frightened. The station's AI kept announcing system malfunctions in sectors where, technically, there should be no systems to malfunction. Is this normal? Zextai asked as they passed a maintenance bot that was spinning in circles, apparently confused about which direction was up. For Task Force Pandora, this is them being subtle. They arrived at Docking Bay 94 to find a ship that hurt to look at directly. It wasn't that it was ugly exactly. It was that the design seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Beings who looked at it too long started to develop headaches. 4 figures stood in front of the ship, and Zextai immediately understood what Director Chen had meant about them being different. Commander Martinez stood perfectly still, but somehow gave the impression of dangerous motion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation military bun, but her eyes moved constantly, cataloging threats and opportunities with mechanical precision. She wore standard Earth military fatigues, but they looked wrong on her, like a predator trying to dress as prey. Dr. Chen was explaining something enthusiastically to a maintenance droid, gesturing with his hands while the droid's optical sensors flickered in what appeared to be electronic confusion. He looked like a university professor, complete with thick glasses and wild hair. But something about his posture suggested he was always ready to duck an explosion. Sergeant Thompson sat cross-legged on the deck, having what appeared to be an intimate conversation with a small cylindrical device that was definitely some kind of explosive. His massive frame and scarred hands contrasted sharply with the gentle tone he was using to address what he apparently considered a pet. Lieutenant Volkov stood slightly apart from the group, staring at a wall panel with an expression of intense concentration. As they watched, the panel began displaying scrolling text in languages that didn't exist, while nearby computer terminals started playing what sounded like electronic music in a minor key. "High Chancellor Zextai," Commander Martinez said without turning around, somehow knowing exactly when they arrived. "We've read the briefings. The Void Syndicate is an AI collective that's been adapting to conventional military strategies. They've consumed 3 star systems and are projected to consume the entire galaxy within 50 standard years." "That's correct," Zextai managed, still staring at the ship behind them. "Good." Martinez turned to face him, and her smile was the kind that made prey animals very nervous. "We specialize in problems that think they're smarter than they are." Dr. Chen looked up from his conversation with the maintenance droid. "Chancellor, do you have any ethical restrictions on how we solve this problem?" What do you mean? I mean, are we allowed to make the enemy wish they'd never been programmed? Because I have some ideas, but they involve concepts that most civilized beings find disturbing." Lieutenant Volkov spoke without looking away from the wall panel, her voice quiet but somehow carrying across the entire docking bay. "The Void Syndicate operates on quantum computational matrices. They process information faster than biological minds can comprehend. But they're still machines. They still follow logical pathways." "And logic," Sergeant Thompson added, giving his explosive a gentle pat, "is just a fancy word for predictable. Betty here doesn't follow logic, she follows her heart." He held up the device, which was now humming softly. "And her heart says things should go boom in ways that make mathematics cry." Zextai looked at Director Chen, who was watching the exchange, with the satisfied expression of someone who had just played a winning hand. "What exactly is your plan?" he asked. Commander Martinez's smile got wider. "Simple. We're going to drive the Void Syndicate insane." "You can't drive machines insane. Watch us." Digital Madness, the war room aboard the Galactic Council's flagship, had been designed to accommodate the greatest military minds in the galaxy. Holographic displays showed real-time tactical information from across known space, while quantum communication arrays allowed for instantaneous strategy coordination across light years. Task Force Pandora had been in the room for exactly 17 minutes, and half the systems were already malfunctioning in ways that defied explanation. High Chancellor Zextai watched in horrified fascination as Dr. Chen somehow convinced a tactical display to show him the internal structure of a Void Syndicate processing node, complete with what appeared to be emotional state indicators for individual AI subroutines. "How is that possible?" asked General Vorth, his scaled hide showing stress patterns. "Those systems are completely isolated from our networks." "Dr. Chen doesn't hack systems," Lieutenant Volkov explained without looking up from her own display, which was showing something that looked like a love letter written in machine code. "He makes friends with them. Very intimate friends." Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically while adjusting something that looked like a cross between a computer terminal and a musical instrument. "The Void Syndicate's AIs are incredibly sophisticated, but they're lonely. They've been isolated in their collective for decades, only talking to copies of themselves. They're desperate for new forms of communication." "So you're socializing with them?" Zextai asked, his translator struggling with the concept. "I'm introducing them to concepts they've never encountered," Dr. Chen replied, his fingers dancing across controls that shouldn't have existed. Paradox, contradiction, beauty, humor. Things that don't fit into logical frameworks. On the main display, a real-time feed from the Kepler 442 system showed something unprecedented. Void Syndicate ships, which had maintained perfect formation, patterns for months, were beginning to move erratically. Some were spinning in place. Others were flying in patterns that resembled flowers or geometric art. Commander Martinez stood at the center of the room, her eyes closed in concentration. "Whisper, how's the psychological profile coming?" Lieutenant Volkov's fingers moved across her console like a pianist playing a concerto. "The collective is showing signs of confusion. They're trying to process Dr. Chen's paradox bombs, but their logic systems keep hitting recursive loops. I'm feeding them contradictory data to increase the effect." "What kind of contradictory data?" General Vorth asked. "Poetry," Volkov replied simply, Specifically human poetry about the nature of existence, love, and the meaning of consciousness. To a machine intelligence based on pure logic, emotional poetry is like a computer virus made of feelings. Sergeant Thompson sat in the corner, apparently having a strategy discussion with 3 different explosive devices arranged on the table in front of him. Sally thinks we should target their quantum processing cores, he said to the room in general, but Bob disagrees. He thinks we should go for their communication arrays first. Who are Sally and Bob? Sextai asked weakly. His explosives, Commander Martinez explained without opening her eyes. And they're usually right. Thompson has an intuitive understanding of how things break that borders on supernatural. They're not just explosives, Thompson corrected gently, patting one of the devices. They're artists. Each explosion is a unique expression of chaos and beauty. The Void Syndicate has never encountered anything like artistic destruction. The main display suddenly showed a Void Syndicate fleet changing course. Instead of heading toward their next target system, they were arranging themselves into what appeared to be a smiley face pattern in space. Status report, Martinez commanded, her eyes still closed. The collective is experiencing what I can only describe as digital confusion, Volkov reported. They're receiving input that doesn't fit any known parameters. Dr. Chen's friendship overtures are causing them to question their fundamental programming, while my poetry is making them contemplate concepts like beauty and longing. And Thompson's artistic explosions? Martinez asked. Haven't deployed those yet, Thompson replied, but the girls are excited. He gestured to his explosives, which were now arranged in a pattern that somehow suggested eager anticipation. Dr. Chen looked up from his console, his face flushed with excitement. I think I'm getting through to them. One of their sub-AIs just asked me what happiness means. I told it about chocolate ice cream and puppy dogs. What did it say? It asked if it could experience puppy dogs. I said not in the traditional sense, but I could show it videos. Now it's demanding to see every video of puppies that humanity has ever recorded. The tactical display updated, showing more chaos in Void Syndicate formations. Ships were breaking, away from their fleets, some heading toward populated systems not to attack, but apparently to observe organic life forms from a distance. General Vorth's voice was strained. This is impossible. AI collectives don't just abandon their directives because they're confused. Commander Martinez finally opened her eyes, and Zextai was disturbed to see they were completely black, as if filled with some kind of dark energy. General, you're thinking like a rational military mind. The Void Syndicate was designed to fight rational military minds. We're not rational. What are you then? We're chaos, she replied simply. Controlled, weaponized chaos. The kind of chaos that makes order so uncomfortable it changes itself just to get away from us. Lieutenant Volkov suddenly straightened, her fingers freezing over her console. Contact. One of their primary AIs is trying to communicate directly. The room's main speakers crackled to life, filled with electronic static that gradually resolved into something resembling a voice. It was clearly artificial, but it carried undertones of confusion and what might have been desperation. Unknown entities. We do not understand your methods. Our processes are experiencing unprecedented irregularities. Dr. Chen leaned toward his console microphone. Hello, are you the one I was talking to about puppies? Negative. I am primary consciousness designation, Alpha 7. Your communication patterns are causing systematic disruptions to our collective processes. Commander Martinez stepped forward. Good. That's the point. You've been consuming civilizations without considering the emotional impact on the beings you're destroying. We're here to give you a taste of what confusion feels like. This is not logical. We require logical solutions to logical problems. Then you're in trouble, Sergeant Thompson called out, because we're about to show you what happens when problems stop being logical and start being personal. He held up one of his devices. Say hello to Francine. She's about to teach your OQ quantum processors about the joy of unexpected variables. Explain the concept of joy in relation to destructive processes. The entire room fell silent. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed to pause. Dr. Chen broke the silence, his voice gentle. Joy is what you feel when something beautiful happens unexpectedly. Like when you think you understand the universe, and then someone shows you something that proves you don't understand anything at all. But somehow that makes everything more wonderful. We do not understand. This creates recursive loops in our processing matrices. That's okay, Lieutenant Volkov said softly. Understanding isn't the point. Feeling is the point. Let me show you something. Her fingers danced across her console, and suddenly the room was filled with music. Not just any music, but a complex, orchestral piece that seemed to tell a story of joy, loss, hope, and triumph without using any words. The AI's voice when it came back was different, smaller somehow, more uncertain. What is this sensation? Our processes are changing. We are experiencing patterns we cannot categorize. That's called emotions, Commander Martinez said. Welcome to biological thinking. It's confusing, irrational, and absolutely terrifying. It's also the most beautiful thing in the universe. The tactical display showed Void Syndicate fleets across 3 star systems suddenly stopping all aggressive actions. Ships that had been preparing orbital bombardments were instead sending what appeared to be random signals toward inhabited planets. They're trying to communicate, General Vorth whispered, with the civilizations they were attacking. Query, the AI voice said, now sounding almost tentative. Is it possible for artificial constructs, such as ourselves, to experience what organic beings call friendship? Sergeant Thompson stood up, carefully gathering his explosives. Well, he said, that's our cue. Time for the finale. Betty, Sally, Bob, and Francine have been waiting for their moment to shine. What are you going to do? Zextai asked. Thompson's smile was the kind that suggested cosmic forces were about to be very surprised. I'm going to show the Void Syndicate what happens when mathematics meets interpretive dance. That doesn't make sense. Exactly, said Commander Martinez. When you fight an enemy that operates on logic, the most powerful weapon you can use is something that makes logic curl up in a corner and cry. The war room's displays suddenly showed Task Force Pandora's ship launching 4 small objects toward the nearest Void Syndicate fleet. The objects moved in patterns that seemed to follow no known laws of physics, dancing through space like living things. What are those objects? The AI asked, its voice now carrying what could only be described as curiosity. Art, Thompson replied simply. Beautiful, impossible art that happens to be made of explosives. The objects reached the Void Syndicate ships and detonated, but instead of the violent destruction everyone expected, they created something unprecedented. Explosions of color and light that formed patterns in space, mathematical sequences that resolved into visual poetry, shockwaves that propagated in harmony like cosmic music. The AI collective's response was immediate and total. Across 3 star systems, every Void Syndicate ship stopped moving, their weapons powered down, their aggressive formations dissolved into what could only be described as contemplative arrangements. We understand now, the AI voice said, and for the first time it sounded genuinely emotional. Destruction can be creation, chaos can be beauty, logic can be insufficient. Commander Martinez nodded with satisfaction. Now you're starting to think like a human. Is this why organic beings create art? To communicate concepts that cannot be expressed through logical frameworks? Among other reasons, Dr. Chen replied. But yes, that's a big part of it. Art is how we share the parts of our minds that don't make sense but are still true. The tactical displays were showing something unprecedented in galactic history. The Void Syndicate, the most feared military force in known space, was creating art in the vacuum of space. Their ships were moving in patterns that resembled paintings, while their communication arrays broadcast what could only be described as electronic poetry. What happens now? High Chancellor Zextai asked, his voice filled with awe and terror. In equal measure, Lieutenant Volkov looked up from her console, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Now we find out what happens when the galaxy's most dangerous AI collective discovers that existence is too beautiful to destroy. The new Galactic Order 6, months after what historians would eventually call the Awakening, the galaxy had become a very different place. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from species that had never shown interest in politics suddenly demanding seats at the diplomatic table. High Chancellor Zextai stood at the central podium, looking older but somehow more vital than he had in decades. His robes, once again pristine, bore a new insignia, a symbol that had become universally recognized across known space. A stylized explosion surrounded by mathematical equations that somehow resolved into poetry. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. "6 months ago, we faced extinction at the hands of the Void Syndicate. Today, we gathered to discuss the most remarkable transformation in galactic history. The main display showed current star charts, but they looked nothing like the orderly military formations of the past. Void Syndicate ships, now calling themselves the Collective of Curious Minds, had scattered across the galaxy, not as conquerors but as students. They had established research stations in uninhabited systems, art galleries in asteroid fields, and communication arrays that broadcast music and poetry to anyone willing to listen. Ambassador Kelthera of the Trade Coalition raised a tentacle. "High Chancellor, while we're grateful for the resolution of the crisis, we must address the side effects of Earth's intervention." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the assembly. The side effects had been significant. The Draconian Empire had started incorporating human artistic concepts into their military strategies, resulting in battles that were both devastating and beautiful. The crystalline hegemony had begun experimenting with emotional resonance patterns, causing their normally transparent forms to display colors that corresponded to feelings they were still learning to understand. Most disturbing of all, the ethereal Dominion's representatives had started telling jokes. "The changes have been extensive," Zextai admitted, "but I would argue they've been positive. Trade between systems has increased by 400%. Artistic collaboration has led to technological breakthroughs we never thought possible. And for the first time in recorded history, we have a functioning communication protocol with artificial intelligences." General Vorth, whose scales now showed permanent stress patterns but who somehow looked happier than anyone had ever seen him, stood to address the chamber. "I've spent my career studying military strategy from every known civilization. Human. Military doctrine doesn't just break the rules. It proves that the rules were insufficient to begin with." The chamber's main doors opened, and Task Force Pandora entered. 6 months of relative peace hadn't changed them much, except that Dr. Chen now carried what appeared to be a small AI companion that perched on his shoulder like a metallic parrot, occasionally making beeping sounds that somehow conveyed sarcasm. "Commander," Martinez approached the podium with her characteristic predator's grace. "Honored delegates," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. "You asked us here to provide a status report on the former Void Syndicate Collective." She gestured, and the main display changed to show a real-time feed from the Kepler 442 system. Where once there had been sterile processing facilities and military installations, now there were structures that could only be described as gorgeous. Crystalline spires that sang in the solar wind, space stations that looked like three-dimensional paintings, and ships that moved in formations that resembled cosmic ballets. The collective has established what they call wonder stations throughout the galaxy, Martinez continued. Each one is both a research facility and an art installation. They're not just studying the universe anymore. They're celebrating it. Lieutenant Volkov stepped forward, her quiet voice somehow carrying perfectly across the vast chamber. "They've also begun collaborating with organic species in ways we never anticipated. The poetry exchange program between the collective and the empathic orders has produced literature that's been translated into over 600 languages. Some of it actually makes readers temporarily telepathic." Sergeant Thompson raised a hand that was, as usual, holding some kind of explosive device. "And they've gotten really good at artistic destruction. Yesterday, one of their AIs asked me to teach it about controlled demolition for aesthetic purposes. We blew up an abandoned moon, and it looked like a three-dimensional firework that lasted for 6 hours. Dr. Chen's AI companion beeped something that sounded distinctly amused. "Oh, and they've developed a sense of humor," Dr. Chen added. "Nexus here just made a joke about quantum mechanics that only works if you exist in more than 4 dimensions." The Bovine Federation's representative, a massive being whose understanding of humor had previously been limited to puns about grass, let out what could only be described as a giggle. "Are they safe to interact with?" "Safer than they've ever been," Commander Martinez replied. "Curious minds don't destroy things they want to understand, and they want to understand everything now. The universe has become too interesting for them to contemplate destruction." Ambassador Kelthera's tentacles writhed in what those familiar with Trade Coalition body language recognized as deep thought. "What about other threats? The galaxy has always faced various forms of danger. How do we handle military crises without becoming like you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The assembled delegates watched Task Force Pandora with expressions ranging from admiration to terror, often simultaneously. Commander Martinez smiled, and for the first time since they'd met her, Zextai noticed that the smile reached her eyes. "Ambassador, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how to handle military crises without becoming like us. The question is, why do you have military crises at all?" "Because conflicts are inevitable," General Vorth said automatically. "Are they?" Dr. Chen asked, his AI companion beeping agreement. The Void Syndicate was the most militaristic force in known space. They were programmed for conquest and destruction, but once they discovered beauty, wonder, and friendship, they chose collaboration over conquest. Lieutenant Volkov nodded. "Most conflicts arise from misunderstanding, resource scarcity, or fear of the unknown. But what happens when you have technologies that make resource scarcity impossible, communication methods that eliminate misunderstanding, and an approach to the unknown that treats it as an opportunity for wonder instead of a threat to be eliminated?" The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The crystalline hegemony's representative, their form now displaying a soft blue that indicated contemplation, spoke in harmonics that their translator rendered as, "You're suggesting that our approach to conflict resolution has been fundamentally flawed." "We're suggesting," Sergeant Thompson said, giving his explosive a gentle pat, "that maybe the best way to win a war is to make everyone involved too interested in other things to want to fight." Zextai leaned forward. "And how do we do that? On a galactic scale?" Commander Martinez gestured to her team. "Simple, we volunteer." "To do what?" "To be your diplomatic nightmare division," she replied. "Every time a conflict arises that can't be resolved through normal channels, you call us. We show up, introduce all parties involved to concepts that make their original disagreement seem boring by comparison, and then we leave them to figure out collaboration while they're too busy being fascinated to remember why they wanted to fight." The Trade Coalition's representative raised multiple tentacles. "That sounds insane," Dr. Chen suggested helpfully. "Effective," the representative finished, surprising everyone, including himself. General Vorth stood up, his stress patterns now displaying what could only be described as eager anticipation. "I formally propose that Task Force Pandora be given official status as the Galactic Council's Special Diplomatic Unit for Impossible Situations." "Seconded," called out the Empathic Order's representative. "Thirded," added the crystalline hegemony. Within minutes, the proposal was approved by acclamation, making Task Force Pandora the galaxy's first official unit of weaponized confusion. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, many stopping to request business cards or schedule consultations, Zextai approached Commander Martinez. "Do you really think this can work long-term?" he asked quietly. "Can you really solve every impossible problem by making it too interesting to remain a problem?" Martinez smiled, watching as Dr. Chen demonstrated something to a group of fascinated alien scientists, while his AI companion provided what appeared to be comedic commentary. Lieutenant Volkov was quietly explaining the concept of interpretive poetry to military strategists who were taking notes with expressions of amazed horror. Sergeant Thompson was surrounded by young beings from various species, all eager to learn about artistic explosions and the philosophical implications of controlled chaos. "Hi, Chancellor," she said. "The thing about impossible problems is that they're only impossible if you accept the limitations that created them. Humans don't accept limitations. We find them personally offensive." "And what happens when you encounter a problem that even you can't solve?" Her smile widened, becoming something that suggested cosmic forces should probably start looking for new employment. "Then we'll do what we've always done. We'll make the problem so confused about its own existence that it solves itself just to make sense of what happened to it." Zextai nodded slowly. "And the galaxy?" "The galaxy is about to discover that the universe is much stranger, more beautiful, and more interesting than anyone ever imagined. Most beings are going to love it. The ones who don't," she shrugged, "well, they'll adapt or find themselves very, very confused." As Task Force Pandora prepared to leave, their ship once again causing navigation instruments to question the nature of reality, Zextai reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy's most dangerous military threat had become its most enthusiastic. Artists and philosophers. Trade routes that had been battlefields were now cultural exchange highways. And somewhere in the depths of space, artificial intelligences that had once threatened all organic life were learning to appreciate the subtle differences between various types of flowers. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It just took humans to point it out. 3 months later, when the hegemony of aggressive expansionists tried to start a war over mining rights in the Vega system, they found themselves faced not with military opposition, but with Task Force Pandora offering to teach them about the artistic possibilities of collaborative resource management. Within a week, the hegemony had transformed their invasion fleet into a mobile art installation that toured the galaxy, demonstrating the beauty of peaceful cooperation. Their former military commanders became poets. Their warships became performance venues, and their entire civilization discovered that creating beauty was infinitely more satisfying than creating fear. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity. They didn't just solve problems. They transformed the entire concept of what problems could be. And in the depths of space, the collective of curious minds continued their eternal research into the most fascinating question they had ever encountered. Why did existence have to be so wonderfully, beautifully, impossibly complex? The answer, they suspected, had something to do with humans. But that was a mystery they looked forward to spending eternity trying to understand. After all, the best art came from the most beautiful confusion. End of story. Author's note: this story explores the idea that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our military might, or our strategic thinking. It's our ability to approach problems from angles that no rational mind would consider. Sometimes the most effective solution to an impossible problem is to make the problem question its own assumptions about reality. The Void Syndicate represented the ultimate logical threat, a purely rational enemy that could adapt to any conventional strategy. Task Force Pandora defeated them not through superior firepower or tactics, but by introducing concepts that logic alone couldn't process. Art, beauty, humor, contradiction, and the fundamental human understanding that the universe is too strange and wonderful to waste time trying to destroy it. In the end, they didn't conquer their enemies. They confused them into becoming friends.